So what the state Supreme Court said is that, yes, city and county of Boulder, you can go ahead, plow through, go on with your climate change lawsuit, as if somehow the city and county of Boulder is trying to get judicially what it cannot get through policy on something that has to do not even locally, not statewide, not even nationally. This is an international issue.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of PowerGab, your go-to show for all things energy and environmental policy in the state of Colorado. I'm Jake Fogleman, joined as always by my co-host Amy Cooke, joining us remotely for this episode. But this week we want to talk about a little bit, kind of a roundup episode. We want to kick things off with some court news, and then we're going to jump into some local governance issues that are a particularly hot topic. But to kick things off, the Colorado Supreme Court last week, as of our recording of this, just gave the go-ahead, the green light, essentially, to Boulder County and its quest to sue ExxonMobil and Suncor over damages caused by climate change, and they're accusing the companies of hiding that their products cause climate change and that they need to be compensated billions of dollars for the damages that they caused. And the Colorado Supreme Court, by a 5-2 vote, said that that can continue.
Yeah, Jake, this decision, although I'm going to give the state Supreme Court credit, there are two sane people there that said, don't go forward with this. And actually, it in some relatively forceful language, right? Yeah. This is a court case that I've written about over the years. I can't remember how early, maybe 2017 may have been the first time I wrote about it. I'd have to actually go back in the timeline and see. But this is basically the city and county of Boulder claiming climate change damages to the city and county. There has been some kind of financial harm to them because of the product that Exxon and Suncor produce. Of course, Suncor is Colorado's only refinery. And what's funny about this is Exxon, I don't know if you remember, but back in the day, there was the Exxon New, hashtag Exxon New, and it's about, they've known about climate change and they've known about the damages that climate change causes. And they have tried very, very hard to tie this to big tobacco, right? Tobacco knew that they were causing cancer. And so to make it a case like that, these kind of cases have been going on all over the country. They've been tossed out in states like, I wouldn't exactly call them right-wing bastions of common sense. New York threw one out. I think Maryland threw one out. The only other place that kept one is Hawaii. But these local governments and others suing these gigantic corporations like Suncor, Colorado's only refinery. And then the other one is Exxon. And I'll get back to why I think it's funny that Exxon was who they named, because back when this lawsuit was brought, Exxon was a tiny player in Colorado. The big ones were Anadarko, Noble, and Encana. But since then, consolidation after consolidation after consolidation, Exxon is now a much larger player, although they have recently abandoned their Denver headquarters for, who knows, I'm going to speculate and say because of the open hostility to the development of a product that people want and need. So what the state Supreme Court said is that, yes, city and county of Boulder, you can go ahead, plow through, go on with your climate change lawsuit, as if somehow the city and county of Boulder is trying to get judicially what it cannot get through policy on something that has to do not even locally, not statewide, not even nationally. This is an international issue. It should be relegated to Congress, but since the city and county of Boulder can't get what it wants through, which is essentially everybody in horse and buggy using wind and solar. Since they can't get that any other way, they want to try and force it through the courts. It's crazy. I I think eventually it gets kicked up to the United States Supreme Court because there's no way that Colorado, the state of Colorado, can hold Exxon and Suncor accountable for warming of the planet.
Yeah, you're spot on that this is the big tobacco lawsuit playbook being repeated in other realms. You see this also in stuff like guns. It's a very similar playbook. But the only difference is, as you alluded to in your comment there, is that this is a product that people actively need. It's, say what you want about the addiction with tobacco and what, people that are addicted to tobacco probably feel like they need it. But no, petroleum products and gasoline, folks that actually absolutely rely on this stuff, not only to get from point A to point B throughout their daily lives, but it's in so many products that we use in our day-to-day lives. So to accuse them of being some pernicious actor here when we all benefit from their products, say what you will, I think that's a little bit disingenuous to try to link the two strategies there with something like tobacco.
And I would argue that the city and county of Boulder, then if the problem is oil and gas development and refineries, then I would argue that the people of Boulder should sue the city and county,
Right.
because the city and county isn't stopping. They just want to force through the courts what they can't get done legislatively. So the city and county can say, "Oh, look, they're making us do it." No, no one's making you do it. You're choosing to do it. And the thing is, the people of Boulder, if that's what you want, then sue your city and county. It's an absurd lawsuit. And for the state Supreme Court to go ahead and say, "Yeah, go ahead. We'll let this nuisance lawsuit go through," is embarrassing to the state of Colorado. And what I really hope to see is this ends up in the United States Supreme Court. Eventually it will, because because the state ultimately, even though the state Supreme Court says the state has jurisdiction and can do this, no, it doesn't. Just because they say so doesn't mean it. Exxon and Exxon and Suncor are both saying these are just silly lawsuits. But the problem is lawyers are going to get wealthy off of it. And what I look forward to and what I hope is that this ends up in the United States Supreme Court. The decision comes for Exxon and for Suncor, because the city and county of Boulder, this is a nuisance lawsuit. It's an international issue. And the courts are the wrong venue for it. It's a policy decision, but that they then turn around and get legal fees from the city and county of Boulder.
Yeah, to your point, that this is now going to be like blood in the water for all the trial lawyers. Now that you have the Hawaii Supreme Court ruling, which was the first of its kind, and now Colorado joining them, I think that sends up a beacon until the Supreme Court nips this in the bud. Before we wrap up on this topic, I want to highlight you teased the Carlos Samore dissent. I just want to read a quick line from there, because I think, like you said, he spoke pretty forcefully against where this type of litigation strategy will ultimately end up. And he says it would lead to quote unquote regulatory chaos. And then he has this great line where he says, "We are but one indivisible nation. Yet the majority in this case gives Boulder, Colorado the green light to act as its own republic." And I think that's just spot on, because the rest of the country and indeed the world didn't elect the government of Boulder County to set climate policy for everybody. So I just think that's a great line. And if we can self-promote for a bit, I want to draw people's attention back to PowerGab episode 32, because we had former Colorado Attorney General and former Interior Secretary Gail Norton on to talk about this case and all the other cases around the nation that are using this playbook. So if folks want to get more into the details of this new strategy, they should definitely check that episode out. But outside of the Colorado Supreme Court, we have some Colorado local news, a pair of local articles dealing with new communities that are actively considering, I don't know what the buzzword is, beneficial electrification, but we like to call it, I think you have a great term, detrimental electrification or forced, basically gas bans, if we're being frank. They want to ban gas, and that's the Erie, Colorado, and then all of Chaffi County, but it sounds like maybe being spearheaded by Buena Vista.
Yeah, so interesting on these. First of all, Erie is part of it is in Boulder County. So, there you have it. The other part of it is in Weld County.
Yeah.
So Weld County, and by the way, the only thing that Boulder and Weld County seem to have in common is a county border. Otherwise, entirely different values. Weld County embraces its responsible development of natural gas and well, actually of shale oil. And Boulder County seems to want, well, actually, let's be honest, Boulder County is more than happy to offshore its usage of oil and gas because make no mistake, they use a ton of it, but they just don't want it developed near them. They don't want to sully themselves especially when you're being environmentally sanctimonious. You sure don't want that in your backyard. But so the Erie Town Council unanimously decides that we've called it the forced march, we've called it a number of things. Governor Polis and his champions call it beneficial electrification. I wish I could claim credit for detrimental electrification, but I can't. A friend of mine gave that to me, and I said, I won't out this person, but I thought it was a great, great turn of phrase. So detrimental electrification. In other words, if you live within the Erie city limits by 2030, all new building for sure will be electrified. And then the other thing is if you're a homeowner in Erie, they will encourage you to electrify all of your appliances, and I'm assuming all of your vehicles.
Yeah.
This is and remember, this is in 5 years.
Yep.
5. This isn't 2040, this isn't 2050, this is in 5 years. So this town, Erie, that sits partway in Weld, partway in Boulder, wants to follow Boulder in its value system, in its virtue signaling, and tell everybody that they can no longer use natural gas. Now, dare I say that I bet there are some oil and gas workers that happen to live in Erie. Some probably live on the Weld County side, and they will be, I guess they're being told by the town of Erie, yeah, we don't want you using the very product that you help develop responsibly and cleanly, because we'd prefer to virtue signal. And here's the other thing, and we talk about this all the time, Jake. This is the last point I'll make on this is that nobody has a cost on it. Nobody has come up with what is the cost to do this. It will be cost prohibitive to Erie, and maybe that's what they want. Maybe they want to drive out anybody who can't afford it, get out of our town if you can pay to retrofit or pay to totally electrify your new home or retrofit your existing home. We're just not interested in having you live within our city limits.
Yeah, the cost piece is fascinating because at least for the Erie decision, the town council, so it sounds like new construction for residential and stuff, they're going to ban natural gas. But they also, this beneficial electrification plan that they unanimously adopted, sounds like, according to this Broomfield Enterprise piece that we're drawing from, it sounds like they're making the government buildings retrofit, which you might say, okay, great. The government's leading by example. If they're going to force people to do things, they should have to do it too. Except that retrofitting, I think we've covered before, is exorbitantly expensive. And because it's the municipal government doing it, that means it's the taxpayers that are footing the bill for the most expensive way to electrify. Doing it in new construction adds costs, yes, but ripping up existing, fossil fueled appliances or heaters or your boilers or what have you, and replacing them and replacing your panel and upgrading, there's just so many upgrades that you have to do that it gets exorbitantly expensive. And apparently the Erie Town Council decided that those folks that pay those taxes there, like you said, could be oil and gas workers. They're going to foot the bill for that. So good thing that they're being so beneficial to the taxpayers of Erie, Colorado.
I'd call it detrimental to taxpayers too. That's a great point about the retrofitting of bill. I mean, it's crazy. But the other one is Chaffee County, right? Where Buena Vista, I mean, you're talking about their largest city is Buena Vista. And it sounds like this is just in discussions, right?
Yep.
They haven't formally decided this yet in Chaffee County. So if you're in Chaffee County, guess what? You can still weigh in on this. And we'll drop the articles, both
Yep.
articles in the show notes so that you have them. And you'll know where to go to make a comment or speak up if you so choose. But they're trying to decide if they should pursue, instead of this electrification preferred, I would call the complete electrification, or the pathway onto detrimental electrification, as we are now coming to call it. What was interesting is Atmos shows up and talked about the cost. And this reminds me of what Eric Blank said. Remember in that PUC, we've talked about what's going on at the PUC. This the comments that he made a few weeks ago saying, I don't know if we can force a utility that is gas only like Atmos to electrify its customers. And I think that's a great question, and one that maybe the entire state ought to consider. Our
Yeah.
elected officials should consider. Can we actually force people, an industry or business that is natural gas, can we force them to electrify their customers? And let's make it against the wishes of the company and against the wishes of the customer. So at least there's some, I would guess, hope, optimism in Chaffee County. They haven't completely said they're going to this electrification, but that it would be electrification preferred. I don't know, electrification light. And
Yeah.
again, nobody ever talks about the cost. It's all seen through the lens of emissions only.
Well,
So
the Atmos Rep, and then there are a couple other, I don't know if they're trade association folks. It's in the article. And by the way, special shout out to the Chaffee County Times, because this was actually a pretty thorough article for a local reporter. So kudos to this journalist here. But they talk about the Atmos folks, and like I said, one other person that testified spoke about the costs. They actually cited an old home builders, the National Association of Home Builders did a study on adopting these very codes that are being considered and how it would add they projected about $20,000 to $25,000 to the cost of building a home. And in response to that pushback, they said they basically just demagogued, oh, you would say that because you work for the gas industry, and don't even address the merits of the argument of the cost. It's one of the members of the Buena Vista Board of Trustees just said, oh, why are we even letting the oil and gas people talk here? And so I guess cost came up, but they weren't willing to give it a fair shake, even though I venture to guess that the citizens of Buena Vista care very dearly about how much this stuff's going to cost them. But like you said, it sounds like this is still very much open to discussion. From the article, it sounds like they've postponed this vote a number of times now because it is so controversial. They're trying to get every municipality in Chaffee County to pass a resolution first before they move forward with these things. But I have to give a little bit of a backstory on this, because this issue is a little near and dear to my heart, because it is one of the first things I worked on here at II when I actually was brought on full time. And that was the whole building energy codes fight. It goes back to House Bill 1362 in 2022, which for the first time really centralized state authority over local building codes. And this was in the aftermath of the Marshall Fire. And there was all sorts of controversy over these local electrification codes that were jacking up the cost of housing when folks had just suffered the worst natural disaster in that area in at least 100 years. And nevertheless, the state of Colorado pushed forward anyway. And now these localities are actually required by law to adopt at least the 2021 IECCs, the International Energy Conservation Codes. And then the electric preferred amendment that you referred to is an optional amendment, although optional with all these heavy-handed state incentives. So these folks, whether or not the Buena Vista Board of Trustees thinks this is a good idea or not, I just want listeners to understand that they are being heavily nudged in this direction by state policymakers. And all goes back to that law that I think we've forgotten about now because there's been so many hairy fights since then. But that thing is still at the center of all of this, where the state has a massive thumb on the scale in pushing these localities to decide for their own residents that you should no longer have access to natural gas and you should be forced to use an induction stove and a heat pump and et cetera.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Colorado has a long way to go to claw back on just the unaffordability. If you want to look
Yep.
at why housing is so unaffordable, the costs of these building codes are going to be a primary factor. The greening of Colorado, and I would say greening in air quotes, because there's nothing actually green about it. They call them green codes, but they aren't green at all. They are just expensive.
And I just jogging my memory with this article, something we brought up on the show before, as we've done the calculations on this. And it's still the case that electricity is about 4 times more expensive than gas in Colorado. So going back to that cost piece, maybe there's a reason that folks don't want to talk about cost on the pro-electrification side, because the numbers just don't seem to work out in their favor. So they'd rather demagogue about the messenger than address the underlying merits of the case for doing this.
And Jake, on this, what is crazy to me, especially as the work that I do in so many states, Colorado uses a speculative emissions only metric when it comes to its energy policy. It doesn't actually look at the real world. It looks at something that could happen in 2100. Something that could happen. We don't know, but something so far in the future that could or could not. It may or it may not happen. We don't know. As opposed to looking at the world here and now. And the modeling that they use is highly manipulative. You
Yep.
can make it come up to whatever outcome you want. There was a great article in the Wall Street Journal a few years ago, Confessions of a Climate Modeler, about, they just tweak a few inputs and come up with the measurement that they want. And that's what Colorado is basing its energy policy on. It's a
Yep.
speculative, controversial sort of metric that's emissions only, as opposed to looking at the real at the world as it is right now and what the impact will be on human beings.
Yep.
It's just a crazy way to do it.
No, that's a fantastic point, especially in the electrification realm. You see it all the time where you'll take the concrete, already well understood costs of doing this, and you weigh them against these, like you said, speculative, highly contested, very amorphous benefits. And if you just attach a slightly higher dollar figure to those, you say, look, the benefits outweigh whatever the costs, whatever hardship we may cause by banning natural gas or making you retrofit or et cetera. So I think that's a fantastic point. I'll let you have the last word here as we're coming up on time, or if you want to leave our listeners with some takeaways from these stories this week.
Yeah, couple of things. One is that Colorado will continue to get more expensive under these policies. So the idea that we'll have more affordable housing, or no matter what happens at the federal level, yes, things like gasoline prices will come down, unless, of course, Colorado shuts down Suncor, in which case, all
Good luck.
bets are off. But
Yeah.
that we're going to see everything in the state get more expensive. It's just going to continue based on, and it's by choice. It's public policy. I also want to highlight that Colorado is going to be a very expensive island, that states around us are not going to be as expensive. So look for the economic development to go to other states. And that means data centers, that means economic opportunity. It means business growth. As we've seen Colorado decline, this is the very reason it's public policy that is doing it. And you'll see other states around us go up. And then lastly, as always, until we right this ship, get a generator and maybe get a couple.
Yeah.
Just so your backup has backup. Firm your own grid, because policymakers aren't doing it for you.
Say firm your own grid, especially if they're going to force you to be wholly reliant on electricity, like some of these localities want you to be. That does it for us on another episode here of PowerGab. If you like what you saw today, you can head over to powergab.org to check out our entire back catalog. We produce new episodes every single week. We're also available wherever you get your audio shows, whether that's Spotify or Apple. And if you want to reach out to us to suggest future show topics or great guests you'd like to see us interview, we're always happy to hear those. You can send those to info@powergab.org. And until next week, we'll see you.